crash through the surface. Crash through the surface to where things can't hurt us. Moving to a place where we're far from the shallows. Sentiments that lead us to start to contemplate what it's like to be in the chaos or the disturbance on the surface, where the winds can come, where we can be caught off guard, where we can fall and falter. And the idea that there may be a place where we can dive down deep. If we go deeper and deeper and deeper, we may reach a stillness. We may reach a place that has an unconditional flavor of peace. Do you believe that's possible? A lot of times in relationship, when we keep it on the surface, they can be very disruptive. Has anyone noticed that? Relationships can be very difficult if we choose to stay in the shallows, if we choose not to go deep. But if we take relationship not as something that's supposed to serve us, or something that's supposed to keep us happy, or something that's supposed to just meet our every need and whim, or every vision we put on the vision board, if we take it instead as a spiritual practice, and we allow ourselves to say, yes, even this, and especially this, is the measure of the transformation of my consciousness, the measure of the evolution of my soul, is my work, is my divine appointment, then we reach a place where we learn about each other, where we dive into deeper, deeper, deeper understandings of what it is to be a part of the human condition, of what it is to have respect and to relate to each other, and especially what it is to have different perspectives, no? To have different perspectives and to allow them to be honored, to not allow them to be in conflict with each other just because they're different. A lot of people don't know this, but in Scripture, when you see the creche and the birth story of Jesus, and you see the wise men, you see the shepherds, and you see baby Jesus, blah, 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 blah. There's like multiple stories, and they weren't all together at the same time in the same place. Those stories conflict in the Scriptures. They conflict in the Bible. And it wasn't a problem, because they show different perspectives. They show different possibilities. They speak to different audiences. They are meant to reach the heart. They are meant to reach the soul with a story of transformation. So too is the activity of relationship. And I think that's one of the reasons why in relationship, when we have different perspectives, we can get to a place where we're not arguing about perspectives. We're not arguing about right and wrong. We enter this kind of Zen state of consciousness where we recognize that we are simply our experiences, and we begin to honor each other's experiences. Has anyone ever found themselves saying to someone else, "Thank you for knowing me so well and loving me anyway"? I say that to anyone that comes close enough to me that they get to see all of me. Because all of me is not like the dance in the movie. All of me, why not take all of me? All of me is kind of like bliss meets nightmare. But when I have the honor of having people in my life that get close enough to see all of me, I am always in awe of their love for me. That there is a softness around all of my stuff, all of my garbage, all of my reactions, all of my quirkiness. And I tend to say, thank you for seeing me and loving me anyway. What if we could do this with life? What if we could reach a place of unconditional acceptance, unconditional love of life itself? So that we could move through the portal like we do in a relationship, where we stop making it have to be perfect, where we stop making it have to be all about us, but we move through it and we allow it to be what it is, and we dive deep. We get out of the shallows and we dive deep. Because we as human beings in the human condition are often in a constant battle with life. And that leads us to a state of mind where we can feel hopeless pretty fast. We can feel hopeless, we can feel disconnected, and we can have a lack of faith, no? Has anyone had any challenges to their center of hope lately? Does anyone have the feeling of having a lack of faith in their fellow human? Are we ready to get out of the shallows and to go deep? Are we ready to enter into the possibility of unconditional life? Of knowing that we can have a different relationship with life itself. We can stop being so disappointed in life when we hear bad news, when we see upset. And we can enter into a different consciousness that is born of peace. This is the Christmas journey. This is the Christmas story. This is the metaphysical and the mystical meaning of the birth of Christ and walking that road. In Ecclesiastes, we all know the beautiful verses of the song, Turn, Turn, Turn. And sometimes it's hard for people to sing that song. Sometimes it's hard for people to say all of the verses. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. For everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Does that ruffle any feathers? A time to be born, a time to die. That can be hard, right? I am still working on having full peace with knowing that we don't stay in our bodies. We know it over and over and over and over again. We know this is life. But we call it bad, don't we? And we call it bad because it feels bad. Because there's part of us that's not in the deep. You know? There's part of us very validly that wrestles with that. Let's go on to read the rest. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal. Who likes singing that verse? A time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. Some parts of that reading are disturbing, especially in unity. We would like to say, no, there's not a time for war, and there's not a time for hate, and there's not a time not to embrace. Right? You may have had that if you're one of the non-huggers and you're sitting next to a hugger. You're like, no, I got my hand out. I got my hands of prayer. And they're like, no, in unity we hug. You're like, no, time to refrain from embracing. Good morning to you. I think that this part of Scripture is in the Bible not because it is a directive, not because it is instructional in the way that it's a commandment and saying, do these things. I think it's in there because it is a raw acknowledgement of what is. It is a raw acknowledgement of what is in the human condition. And it's a balancing of the yin and the yang. It's saying this is part of life. This is what happens. This is what is happening. Take comfort in a level of consciousness that is beyond that story. It's not saying make war. It's not saying don't embrace. It's not saying kill. It's saying that when these things happen, as they will, you can still have faith. still bring hope. Still strive for peace, which leads to love, which leads to joy, which leads to the birthing of the Christed consciousness. This passage is here so that we can remember when we're in the shallows. And it tells us not to get stuck here, because this is just the experience of the human condition, which is part of our evolution of consciousness, which is truly what the Bible is a description of. It is a depiction of the evolution of consciousness from Adam and Eve mind, and separation, through to the Christed, to the unity conscious, to oneness. But how in this world of hostility do we do this? I was listening to NPR recently, and there was a story which was, I'm pretty sure, a flashback of a story from a while ago. And it was about a man that was pregnant. And you may say, what's that about? How is that possible? And I think a while ago, I even remember seeing this on some magazine covers and stuff like this. And I just caught part of the program, but it was an interview with the man that was pregnant. And it turns out it was a trans man, and he was in a relationship, and they wanted to have a child. And he acknowledged that, actually my body can have a child. We could have a biological child. And so I'm sure after doing a lot of work on worthiness and deserving, imagining this culture that he would be doing this in, he got the strength to move forward and to go ahead and decide to, stop whatever hormone treatments he was getting and create a family, start a family. And the interviews went on, and he was talking about what that experience was like and what it was like to be ridiculed and mocked as a pregnant man, and all of the things that came with that. And he got to the point where he talked about people's reaction, and a good Christian woman who reacted and said that his child would be an abomination, and would a lot of other horrific things about what this child would be, and how that was so painful for him to think that here you are doing the most beautiful thing of bringing a child into the world, and you're delivering them unto people who, no matter what, will look at them as having the wrong beginnings, look at them as being flawed, look at them as being imperfect, not worthy, unacceptable. And he said something, and I wish I had the exact quote, but he said something in that interview about the process of having this child, and he said, the decision to have a child, something like this, the decision to have a child is one of the largest statements of faith in humanity. Having a child, especially in an environment or in a culture or in an outer world that you see as not conducive to beholding the purity and the perfection, the love and the beauty of a beloved, of God being born into our hands. The decision to do that is like a radical decision of faith and hope in humanity, in each other, in you, in the woman that said that. It is the biggest demonstration of faith that we can have. And he said that with a beauty that melted away the hatred, and that brought you not from the mind's hearing of, okay, wait, there's a man that's going to have a baby. Okay, wait, so what do I think? What would I do? Gets you right out of that shallow water and crashes you into the deep, into the heart of humanity, and into what it's like to step forward, not because you have evidence of what you want to see, but because you have hope. You have faith in the things yet unseen, and you make a decision, you make a choice to bring them about. You make a choice to, even in the midst of what is contrary to that knowing, to look past the ego, past the separation, past the hatred, past the judgment, past the anger, past the discord, past all of it, to see the truth And to say, even though I see this, I am not making an agreement with it, I am not standing with it, I will still offer it the fullness of my raw, unconditional love in the form of delivering this child to it. This story sounds like another story from long ago of a woman delivering a child into her community with faith and hope. Think for a moment. Flash back in time to what it was like when Mary became with child. The environment that Jesus was born into. Scripture shares this story with us because it is the story that tells us what are the conditions for ultimate hope and faith. What are the conditions for ultimate hope and faith? If Jesus represents the anointed, awakened self in all beings, and Scripture is leading us to this story, to say, here are some of the conditions in which the awakening can happen, in which the fullness of your being can come into fruition. Jesus was born into a world of darkness at the time. The birth story was filled with darkness. It was even written that the people were shrouded in darkness at the time. There was conflict. There was doom and gloom. There were Jews of the time who had been waiting for a prophet to hail the coming of the Messiah, and they thought God had been silent for years upon years upon years, waiting for the fulfillment of the promise, but hearing nothing. There was a hostile government, a hostile community, political darkness. The nation of Israel was fracturing. There were people against people, families against families. There were ideas of who was worthy and who was not worthy. A census was ordered reminding the people that they were owned by someone, reminding people that they were under the oppression of Rome. There were even groups within the nation of Israel that were in conflict, creating problems with each other, all with different agendas. The same people, but with different agendas. People opposing each other. And then there was the virgin birth, which at the time was not celebrated. How do we know it wasn't celebrated? Well, we know that we're told that Joseph, who represents an aspect of consciousness in mind, Joseph was a righteous man and he loved Mary, and so he sought to divorce her quietly. He thought, let's take care of this. Let me get out of this, but I got to do it quietly. Because everyone at the time knew how you got pregnant. And if it wasn't with Joseph, then something else was going on. And in the time to bring a child into that, in that culture, in that time and space, that child would be thought of as an abomination. That child would be thought of by good, loving Jews as unworthy. Would be cast out. Those are the conditions. Kind of like a pregnant man today. It's not like it is today when you see Mary revered, when you see Mary held up and honored, when you see creches around town or in yards, when you send Christmas cards with the birth narrative on the front. This was not the world into which Jesus was born and in which Mary conceived. Do we remember that? Here's the good news. This scripture story reminds us that when we get out of the shallow and we crash through the surface and we get into the deep waters of the spiritual life, we see that there is a strength and there is a faith and there is a hope that can be demonstrated that is unmatched. And that's revealed in this story. That the unconditional love of a mother birthed the awakened consciousness. And for any parts of our mind that think we get stuck, we don't progress, the world is going to hell in a handbag. At one time, this story was beheld not as sacred, not as a description of the evolution of consciousness or the possibility of man. This story was held in contempt. And now, we have evidence that we have evolved past that. In fact, all of Christianity is based on believing a woman. And all of the sacred practice that experiences that is based on going deep, not just relationships, but with life. And entering into an unconditional relationship with life. Reminding us, whispering to us, or shouting at us, do not get stuck here. This is the experience of the human condition, part of the evolution of our consciousness. So whatever it is that we see in the world around us and the world within us that is urging us to grow and expand, let us behold it. Let us allow it. Closing with a meditation from Yogananda. He says, teach us, O Christ, to be devoted to our Father as thou art. After waiting for me through many incarnations, Christ is being born anew in me. All the boundaries of my little mind are broken, that the Christ child may wake on the lap of my consciousness. Christ consciousness in me is the shepherd to lead my restless thoughts to my home in divine peace. O Lord, make my heart big enough to hold thee, that it throb with the Christ consciousness in everything. Then shall I enjoy the festivity of thy birth in my mind, my soul, and in oneness with every pulsing atom. Namaste.